Hello, back again on the Top Recap channel. This time I will tell a movie's entitled Marco. Let's get straight into the storyline. The story begins by introducing a blind young man named Victor, who is watching a Fight Club performance with his cousin, Wasim. Despite his visual impairment, Victor possesses an exceptionally sharp sense of smell, allowing him to recognize specific scents, such as the perfume Wasim wears. After the show, as they prepare to leave, an unexpected tragedy strikes. Wasim suddenly disappears from sight, only to be found dead on the ground. His murder is the work of a gang led by a man named Russell. With his keen sense of smell, Victor quickly detects Russell's presence through the familiar fragrance of his cologne. However, upon realizing that Victor is blind, Russell chooses to spare his life, neither harming him nor taking any further action against him. The following day, at Wasim's funeral, Victor attends despite belonging to a different faith. Among the mourners is Russell, whose presence does not go unnoticed. The distinct scent of his cologne immediately alerts Victor, prompting him to step outside and call his girlfriend, Issa, intending to reveal the identity of Wasim's killer. Unfortunately, Russell quickly catches on and seizes the opportunity to abduct Victor on the spot. Victor is taken to an abandoned chemical factory, where he is held captive by Russell and his men. When Victor refuses to stay silent about what he knows, Russell strangles him before throwing him into a vat of acid, seemingly ending his life. Meanwhile, in a different part of the city, a notorious mafia boss named Tony conducts business with an iron fist. Known for his ruthlessness, Tony does not tolerate disloyalty. When one of his subordinates is caught gambling, Tony punishes him without hesitation by forcing a gun into his mouth, delivering swift and merciless justice. Elsewhere, in a grand estate belonging to a wealthy gold mining family, George, the eldest brother and head of the household, receives devastating news. His youngest brother, Victor, has been killed. Overcome with grief, George struggles to accept the loss. However, rather than seeking immediate revenge, he is more concerned about how this information might affect their middle brother, Marco, a man known for his uncontrollable rage and violent nature. Fortunately, Marco is currently abroad pursuing higher education, which spares the family from an immediate crisis. As George orders his men to keep Victor's death a secret, his young nephews gather nearby, admiring Marco. To them, he is a hero, a fierce protector of the family. Their discussion turns to the last time Marco made headlines before leaving for his studies, a harrowing incident that occurred a year ago. At that time, George received a distressing call from a group of kidnappers claiming to have taken one of his brothers. They demanded 4 kilograms of gold bars in exchange for his safe return. Fearing for Victor's life, George rushed to confirm his whereabouts. Once reassured that Victor was still at home, George realized the kidnappers had made a grave mistake. The brother they had captured was, in fact, Marco. Unaware of Marco's true nature, the kidnappers were soon met with horror. One of their own was found dead, and at that moment, Marco emerged, having already freed himself. A force to be reckoned with, Marco does not take betrayal lightly. When provoked, he unleashes unrelenting brutality upon anyone who dares to stand in his way. In the present, during George's speech at the church for Victor's final tribute, the entire audience is suddenly taken aback by the arrival of someone who has just returned from abroad. Among the guests is Tony, George's business partner. In front of everyone, Marco boldly declares that he will hunt down those responsible and bathe them in their own blood. His brutal statement shocks many, including George, who is embarrassed by Marco's reckless behavior. George demands that Marco stay out of the matter and not interfere in the investigation of their youngest brother's murder. However, if George thought Marco's reaction was excessive, he was gravely mistaken. The bond between Marco and Victor was much stronger than with their other siblings, making Marco's rage at Victor's death entirely understandable. Later, at George's estate, a meeting is held with his business partners, including Tony. George pleads for their cooperation in investigating Victor's murder. Unexpectedly, Marco barges into the meeting uninvited, insisting on participating in the investigation himself. Tony, unwilling to remain idle, offers to form an investigative team led by his own son. That son is none other than Russell, the very man who murdered Victor. Unbeknownst to George and Marco, the entire situation is part of Tony's grand scheme to eliminate his business rivals and seize control of George's gold mining enterprise. One of George's business partners opposes Marco's involvement, fearing that his reckless nature will worsen the situation. His actions leave the entire room in stunned silence. After the meeting, Tony and Russell begin devising a new plan to deceive Marco and George. Their strategy is to use Marco's aggression to intimidate rival business owners by falsely accusing them of Victor's murder. Russell pretends to be helpful and offers to escort Marco wherever he goes. Marco started confronting various business owners, placing their lives at stake in his relentless pursuit of justice. After interrogating all the key figures in the region, Marco's search led him to the very fight club that Victor and Wasim had attended before the tragedy. Instead of finding clues about his brother's murder, Marco was challenged by the reigning champion of the club, a fighter who had long wanted to test his skills against him. Without hesitation, Marco accepted the challenge and prepared to fight. Meanwhile, Tony grew increasingly impatient to take control of the gold mining business owned by Marco and his family. To accelerate his plans, he sent one of his most trusted men, Peter, to accompany George in his car, only to stab him to death at the right moment. Fortunately, George survived, though he was in critical condition. When Marco arrived at the hospital, his anger intensified. Tony, who happened to be there, pretended to be deeply saddened and promised to find out who was behind the stabbing.
My brother George.
However, as soon as he got into his car, Tony furiously berated Peter for his failure to kill George. With no other choice, Peter was forced to flee the city and go into hiding for the time being. Meanwhile, a righteous police captain named Gel had been working alongside a YouTuber, Gandhi, to uncover the truth behind Wasim and Victor's murders. By sheer luck, Gandhi had accidentally recorded footage of Russell killing Wasim in the parking lot. Using this as their initial evidence, the two set out to investigate a drug manufacturing facility, which turned out to be owned by Tony, the mafia boss. Acting quickly, Gel immediately took the evidence, including the video recording, to his superior, only to discover that his boss was one of Tony's associates. This meant that Tony now knew Gel and Gandhi were trying to expose his crimes. Without hesitation, he ordered Russell to eliminate both of them, ensuring there would be no witnesses left. Meanwhile, Marco was still conducting his own investigation alongside Russell and his men. At the same time, George finally regained consciousness. Wasting no time, he called Marco to reveal the mastermind behind everything. Unfortunately, Marco was too late to realize the truth. Russell had already captured him.
The maniac Marco. Bastard.
Marco and his cousin were taken deep into a forest near a lake, where they were to be executed. Russell, showing no hesitation, wielded a chainsaw, ready to finish them off. However, unlike most people, Marco showed no sign of fear, frustrating Russell, who wanted to see him break before death. To torment Marco further, Russell instead severed his cousin's arm, aiming to weaken Marco's spirit and resolve. Satisfied, Russell walked away, leaving his men to carry out the execution. But Russell had made a grave mistake by wasting time. Even with his hands still tied, Marco managed to fight back using only a knife he clenched between his teeth. Once he freed himself, Marco went on a rampage, slaughtering all of Russell's men. After wiping out his enemies, Marco turned his attention to Russell, who, in reality, was nothing more than a coward with no real fighting skills. It took little effort for Marco to overpower him. Instead of killing Russell, Marco decided to leave with his cousin, who was rapidly losing blood. As he drove, Marco glanced at his cousin's pale, pain-stricken face, and his rage surged once again. Unable to hold back any longer, Marco stopped the car, grabbed the chainsaw, and prepared to finish Russell off for good. Just as he was about to strike, his phone rang. It was Tony on the other end of the line. Tony revealed a shocking truth. Victor's lover, Issa, was pregnant with his child. Worse yet, she had been taken hostage and was being held at a secret location. As a result, Marco had no choice but to abandon his vengeance for the moment. Returning home, Marco immediately held a discussion with George and the rest of the family about Issa and the unborn child she carried. Marco's family upheld a firm principle to protect and safeguard their bloodline at all costs. So when it became known that Issa was carrying Victor's child, nothing was off the table to ensure her safety. While George sought a peaceful resolution by offering his gold mine to Tony, Marco chose a different path, tracking down Peter in his hideout. Somehow, Marco had discovered his exact location, sealing Peter's fate. After capturing and interrogating him, Marco extracted the information about Issa's whereabouts.
Yes, you are talking to him.
With the necessary details in hand, Marco left Peter to die in a brutal explosion inside a shipping container. Upon arriving at the location, Marco swiftly eliminated over a dozen of Tony's men before making his way to the rooftop to rescue Issa. However, the woman he found there was not Issa, but someone else. It was all part of Tony's elaborate plan, anticipating Marco's arrival and deceiving him. However, as soon as Marco left the scene, he arranged a meeting with Russell elsewhere. The deal was simple: exchange Issa for a suitcase filled with gold bars. But to Russell's horror, inside the suitcase was not just gold, it also contained the severed arm of his own father, Tony. Overcome with fury, Marco had lashed out at Tony at the previous location, cutting off his arm in his rage, thus making the exchange brutally fair. Faced with no other choice, Russell surrendered Issa in an attempt to save his father, who was being held captive. At the same time, Tony was bound to a chair rigged with a gun and an acid trap above him. Shortly after, Russell and his men carefully began dismantling the deadly contraption, trying to free Tony. But before they could finish, the trap was triggered, and Russell was forced to watch his father perish in a fiery explosion. Enraged, Russell wasted no time seeking out his eldest brother, a man notorious for his ruthless nature. His name was Cyrus, Russell's adoptive brother, who, at that very moment, was casually butchering a corpse. When Russell delivered the grim news of their father's death, Cyrus asked only one question: who was responsible? Without hesitation, Russell answered, Marco.
Marco.
As the conflict escalated, George, having just returned from the hospital, took charge of their family's safety. With Issa already 9 months pregnant and expected to give birth that very night, George ordered the entire family to remain inside the house. He instructed his relatives, his wife, nephews, grandchildren, in-laws, and others to hide in their respective rooms. George stationed himself at the front of the house while Marco was assigned to guard the room where Issa would give birth. As expected, Cyrus and his armed forces stormed the estate, unleashing a hail of gunfire on the exterior before detonating the front door and charging inside. Amid the darkness, George fought fiercely, taking down enemy after enemy. But the sheer numbers were overwhelming, and eventually, both he and Marco, who appeared unusually weak that night, were captured. With the 2 strongest defenders subdued, Cyrus's men began their ruthless sweep of the house, room by room, dragging out each member of George's family. What followed was nothing short of a massacre. The brutality was beyond human comprehension. Men, women, and children alike were slaughtered without mercy. By the time it was over, not a single soul from George's family was left alive. Just as Cyrus finished slaughtering everyone before Marco's very eyes, the sound of a newborn's cries filled the air. It was Issa's baby, just born. Without hesitation, Cyrus stormed into Issa's room, mercilessly ended her life, and took the baby with him. Marco was left alive, forced to endure the pain of losing his entire family, but with the realization that the baby was the only remaining link to his bloodline. Despite his despair, Marco found renewed strength. He would stop at nothing to rescue the child, his last remaining hope. At a drug factory that served as his main base, Cyrus sat down for a calm dinner, unaware of the storm heading his way. Suddenly, an explosion shattered the silence, and from the smoke emerged Marco, his appearance unexpectedly composed. Without hesitation, he charged towards Cyrus and his dozens of men, unleashing unrelenting fury upon anyone who dared stand in his path. Watching from below, both Cyrus and Russell were left in shock. Marco's savagery was beyond anything they had ever seen. His rampage was so intense that his clothes tore apart, unable to contain the sheer power surging through his muscles. Seizing a machine gun from the chaos, Marco mowed down every last one of Cyrus's men in a relentless onslaught. With the henchmen eliminated, Marco leaped down and rushed toward the baby. But before he could reach the child, Russell attacked, wielding a weapon. Yet Marco, numb to pain after enduring so much suffering, barely felt the impact. Overcome with rage, he drove his bare hands into Russell's chest, killing him instantly. Seeing his brother lifeless, Cyrus grabbed the baby and threatened to drop the infant into a vat of acid. For a fleeting moment, Marco was haunted by the final expressions of his lost family members. Without hesitation, he seized a sword and, in a single decisive strike, beheaded Cyrus, ending his reign of terror once and for all. With his vengeance complete, Marco returned home, cradling the baby in his arms. He made a solemn vow to raise the child alone, to instill in him a strong moral foundation.